What are some government secrets that have been declassified that most people still don't know about? I'm just waiting until the JFK case is declassified. Because it sure as hell wasn't Magneto's fault. By the time the public knew about the SR-71, it was old technology. None have ever been shot down. Whatever replaced it is better. ActCom. That the US granted various high-ranking Nazis a place in our society in return for various services. Some guilty of war crimes were among them. When American Indian Movement, AIM, protesters occupied the Bureau of Indian Affairs, BIA, headquarters in 1972. They found secret documents that some native women had been sterilized without their knowledge or consent. The US caused the death of the world's first commercial satellite, Telstar, only a few months after it was launched. We set up a nuclear blast in space, 5. Actually, and that blast, Starfish Prime, created an electromagnetic pulse, EMP, that held Telstar, which was placed in orbit the day after the test. The EMP effects energized the Earth's magnetic field long enough to cause the satellite to die on orbit. The Gov didn't tell a tant what happened until around 2005 or so. Whoops. Our bad, sorry. Wikipedia.org. During WWII, Stalin warned the Japanese that the US was planning on bombing Formosa, practically giving away our plans to invade the Philippines. He didn't want the war to end too soon as it would cut down on the territories he could conquer and claim for the USSR. The US government allowed criminals to buy weapons from gun stores and transport them to Mexico. Also parts to make grenades. These gums have killed, at least, over 200 people, including a US Border Patrol agent. Eric Holder was forced to release over 60,000 pages of documents last night. Not getting a lot of attention though because of the elections. Edit, Operation Fast and Furious. Project MKUltra. During the Cold War, the CIA initiated Project MKUltra, a secret and illegal human research program to investigate potential mind control systems. The program's operators examined the effects of hypnosis, biological agents and drugs, such as LSD and barbiturates, on human subjects. Some historians suggest the program was designed to develop a mind control system that could be used to program the brains of potential assassins. There are a number of secrets from WW2 and after that have been declassified yet few know about. Most involve things like troop movements, etc. It may seem weird to only declassify them decades later, but the fact is military doctrine changes very slowly, and even something as simple as a janitorial supply list can give a good estimate of the number of personnel in an area. Area 51. Tested MiGs. Stealth tech. Used it to evaluate us reckoned satellites and screw around with the Ruskies. After WWII, the United States gave immunity to Shiro Ishii, the Japanese Army medical officer responsible for lethal human experimentation and biological warfare projects. He performed so many horrible acts on POWs in Unit 731. Just to see what would happen. Seriously. His unit conducted physiological experiments on human subjects, including vivisections, forced abortions, and simulated strokes, heart attacks, frostbite and hypothermia. American scientists decided this information was invaluable and he was never tried for his crimes. He was given immunity in exchange for his information on chemical and biological warfare. Wikipedia.org. Operation Popeye, a highly classified weather modification program. Yes, they can manipulate the weather. From some flying magazine. The SR-71 was introduced in 1966. At a time in which commercial aircraft were pretty much limited to 25-30 feet altitude maximum. There was a very junior air traffic controller, bored out of his mind, minding a ATC center somewhere in the heartland. Now, he frequently handled and scheduled changes in altitude. Pilots would call them in and he'd routinely grant the change. This evening, he gets a call, Northfield ATC. This is Rainbow27. Requesting altitude 50,000. Controller, okay, Rainbow27. If you can get up to 50k, you can have it. Rainbow27, roger that. Descending to 50k. Thanks and good night. If you cross Detroit's southern border, you are in Canada. The US Army SL-1 nuclear accident. The SL-1 was a low-power test reactor in Idaho. They shut the reactor down for the holidays. On the 3rd of January, 1961. 3 guys went in to power it back up after coming back from vacation. Part of the startup required they reconnect the control rods to the mechanism that raises and lowers them in the pile. To do this, they needed to manually raise the rods a few inches, grab the rod assembly by hand and lift it. For some reason which isn't clear, the reactor operator who was lifting one of the rods suddenly lifted one of them almost 2 feet too far. Probably because it was stuck and he was pulling hard on it and it broke free. This caused the reactor to immediately go critical and superheat the coolant water, causing a steam explosion and blasting the shield plugs out of the top of the reactor. Also not clear is why the shift supervisor was standing on top of the reactor at the time. He was found impaled by one of the shield plugs in the concrete ceiling of the reactor room. The explosion killed the operator instantly. The third participant survived the blast and was found in the reactor room by rescuers, but later succumbed to his injuries. The reactor melted down. The site was buried and abandoned. NSA Sergeant Declassified in 2005 demonstrated that the second Gulf of Tonkin incident, which provided the casus belli for America's ground war in Vietnam, never actually happened. That both Obama and Queen Elizabeth are reptilians. What crashed in Roswell was declassified in the early 90s. It was a cluster of balloons being developed to listen for nuclear detonations. There's a layer in the atmosphere where a loud enough sound can actually carry around the world. The project became pointless before it was completed by the invention of satellites. And they are working to digitize it to make it even more accessible. Late to the thread, but Julia Child was an OSS operative. The OSS was the precursor to the CIA. This was declassified not very long ago. She did work in the China-Burma-India theater, I believe. The United States supported the brutal dictator Pinochet, assassinated Colonel Schneider, and trained DINA, Chilean intelligence paramilitary group that committed human rights abuses including disappearances, deaths, and torture. Nixon and Kissinger damaged Chile's economy in order to destabilize the country, creating a coup climate. These files have been declassified and you can read them all in the Pinochet file. Operation Fast and Furious. The ATF purposely selling gums to cartels to try and trace them to high-ranking cartel members. Yet I believe no arrests came of it. And at least one of the gums was used in the murder of a border patrol agent. I'm really surprised that this one isn't in the list. Nixon committed treason in the run-up to the '68 election. He engineered it so that the Vietnamese government wouldn't accept the ceasefire that Johnson had negotiated. Even George will concede that the proof is incontrovertible. Testing dispersion patterns of bio and chem warfare agents in populated areas with ZNCDS. Wikipedia.org. Project Pluto. Terrifying idea. Extremely surprised as to how this wasn't previously mentioned. But Hitler did not kill himself at the conclusion of WWII, he escaped. FBGov. UK here. During WW2 there was a night ferry off the Dorset coast. This was in fact a government experiment ship spraying virus and bacteria over Dorset so they could measure how far the cloud went by counting the dead. We took the Nordsee's aviation research after WWII. The research at times used actual human guinea pigs for research. My father was a part of the American Operation IV Bells, Wikipedia.org, the underwater part. He didn't know he was allowed to talk about it until someone else released a book about it a few years back. Operation Northwoods. The US was going to bomb its own cities, blame it on Cuba and declare war. Edit. Certain personnel wanted to create a false flag operation. From what I was told, it wasn't to bomb the cities, so. However, Kennedy pretty much said, "Duck, no. You are not doing that." Furthermore, he removed Lemnitzer as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff after it. Jesus, duck people, I get it, he got shot. Making a 10th comment about it is unnecessary at this point. COINTELPRO, in which the FBI illegally infiltrated political organizations to disrupt and discredit them. Mostly civil rights groups and leftist organizations. But also some far-right groups. Such as the KIE law. We ducked up the Castle Bravo test. For those who don't know, the Castle Bravo test was the largest nuclear explosion ever produced by the United States. The short and sweet is that we packed the explosive components in with a bunch of benign substance. The benign substance was an isotope of the explosive sheet. So the ratio was like %60 of the active element and %40 inactive. We didn't know that if you blast the inactive isotope with enough energy, it transforms itself into the active isotope. We made the explosion much bigger than intended, and it almost held the skeleton crew in the observation bunker. We estimated beforehand that the explosion would be somewhere in between 4 MGT and 8 MGT. 8 being the scary big end of the spectrum. It was 15 ducking megatons. Project Thors. Project Thor is an idea for a weapons system that launches kinetic projectiles from Earth's orbit to damage targets on the ground. Jerry Pournelle originated the concept while working in operations research at Boeing in the 1950s before becoming a science fiction writer. The system, most often described as an orbiting tungsten telephone pole with small fins and a computer in the back for guidance, the system described in the 2003 United States Air Force report was that of 20 foot long, 6.1 m, 1 foot diameter, 0.30 m, tungsten rods that are satellite controlled and have global strike capability with impact speeds of Mach 10. The time between deorbiting and impact would only be a few minutes, and depending on the orbits and positions in the orbits, the system would have a worldwide range. There is no requirement to deploy missiles, aircraft or other vehicles. Although the SALT II, 1979, prohibited the deployment of orbital weapons of mass destruction, it did not prohibit the deployment of conventional weapons. The system is not prohibited by either the Outer Space Treaty or the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. Some systems are quoted as having the yield of a small tactical nuclear bomb. Wikipedia.org